Greetings, traveller. Here in the silence of this library, I uncover the most fascinating stories that have long been forgotten. Stay a while and listen, and I shall take you on a journey that has endured for centuries. Shadowbound. Chapter 1. Shadows at the Camp. A brittle wind unspooled down the mountainside, snagging on dead grass and ancient stones. Two figures huddled close to a glimmering fire at the foot of the pass. The mountains above were streaked with moon silver and cloud, swallowing every sound. Tharald, a broad-shouldered man from Bree, hunched inside his patched cloak, hands warming on rough pottery. His shield, scarred from years of roadwork and barroom brawls, rested near his boots, the sword at his hip, a heavy, familiar presence in this wild place. He watched the tree line warily, the silence pricking old instincts. Borin, stocky and thick-bearded, glared into the flames with restless energy. His heavy crossbow and its bladed stock glinted beside him. Every so often, his fingers absently checked the tension of its string or the brace of quarrels, as if daring fate to offer trouble. Now and then he tisked, impatience rolling off him in disgruntled puffs. Elves, he muttered. Last to feasts, last to battles, always sniff in the wind for omens. You mark me, Tharald. Faelar turn up only when every bug in these hills is counted, and make excuses about moonlight and memories. Tharald grinned quietly. Speak softer. He claims the wind brings him stories. He took a mouthful from his battered flask, but he is late, and so is Brynden. Borin scowled. The horseman always waits for a race or a brawl. He glanced at the entry to their makeshift camp, brow furrowing beneath his copper tattoos. I'd like to get it over with. The fewer nights spent under these peaks, the better. A distant crunch, then voices low and familiar, approached from the dark. Brynden, tall and thick-armed, led the way into the fire's spill. His twin axes hung at his hips, and his battered cloak, dyed in earthy green, billowed behind him. I bring an elf and little patience, he called quietly, grinning through his stubble. Faelar glided forward, hood shadowing high cheekbones, the silver of his eyes catching the flame. We heard a dwarf cursing from half the mountainside. Borin huffed, but there was a quiet pride behind the gesture. Welcome late, but welcome. Any trouble? Brynden shook his head, plucking a stray burr from his sleeve. Old ruins and cold shadows, but nothing with teeth or malice. Yet, Faelar added, voice soft and gentle as wind through reeds. They gathered around the flames. The mood was wary, but hunger and old camaraderie edged the tension. Each had their reasons for being here: coin, curiosity, or the hope of legend come true. Finally, Borin tossed a rough paper onto the ground. Look here, my kin told tales, quiet ones, of what drives men to ruin and dwarves to doom, the vault of King Durim's Stonehand. When Nargum-Baraz fell, he vanished. Some say, into his treasury, clutching riches no sword or shadow could take. If we're lucky, the secret chamber my uncle's map points to still waits beyond the bones of the greedy and the witless. Brynden frowned, turning the map this way and that. And you are sure of this? That no one's found it before us? Borin shot him a look. Most parties come for what's easy, or what gleams. Few bother with riddles or places that resist greed. The entrance is below the old gallery, hidden even from the last offenders. With this, he tapped the paper, and a little patience. Tharald groaned. Patience, you say, in a nest of lingering orcs and things nameless. We'll tread the safe halls, skirt the main vault, watch for old traps and new monsters. Dwarves build deep, but also clever. Borin's eyes glittered in the shadows. Besides, most believe the king's hoard is spent. Few know of the second vault, the one only his closest kept. Faelar leaned in, examining the faded lines. There is more than greed in these stones. The elves remember friendship and ruin among dwarves. But I sense something unfinished lingers in Nargum-Baraz. Something that resists death or forgetting. Brynden shifted, flexing his hands. We seek gold, not ghosts. But I'll take luck in any form. A long silence stretched as each considered the night ahead. Borin finally stood. We move at dawn. Bring only what you must. The narrower shafts wind through the first hour's walk, and there are dead ends in every tongue. Kuzdul, Sindarin, and the gnaw-marks of goblins. Tharald cleaned his sword silently. If there's loot worth the risk, I'll watch your back till last breath, Borin. But I'll not trust the wind alone for warning. Faelar's smile was thin, haunting. And I will trust walls to remember more than treasure. Some stories wait for ears to bleed them clean. They douse the fire, hiding its embers with rock and earth. Amid the murmur of wind and the vast dark hush of the mountains, the party turned in, each dreaming, restlessly, of what slept beneath the stone. Dawn was false for those who journey in shadow. 4 figures moved quietly up the ruined stair, dwarven stone carved with faded runes beneath their boots. Tharald led beside Borin, their eyes hunting always for fresh danger or lost promise. Brynden brought up the rear, his steps quiet for one so large. Faelar was last, gaze flickering between torchlight and darkness, ever attuned to whispers no mortal heard. When the passage narrowed, Borin grunted, "This is it. The descent to the secret ways. Once the main halls open, we'll cut left, avoid the old vault and the main drag." "Good," muttered Tharald. "Let others die chasing bones. We'll chase riddles and hope the real curse is boredom." They pressed onward, quietly, down into the deepening dark, toward the promise of forbidden wealth and a secret older than legend. Chapter 2. Into the Ruin. Stones swallowed sound and sunlight alike. With every step from the daylight, the world narrowed to the flicker of Faelar's torch and the cold, breathless hush of tunnels carved before the kingdoms of men were born. Dwarven script wound down the passageway, proud letters blackened with soot and age, and every tap of Borin's boots rang a note of memory and warning. They moved in careful pairs. Borin led, his bulk and experience steadying the group as he mapped each alcove and carved step. Tharald, shield readied, haunted every shadow, gaze catching on cracks that might hide traps, or worse. Brynden and Faelar kept the flank, one restless, the other all tense elegance, blades angled for silent warning. What grandeur there once was in Nargum-Baraz. The first hall opened with high curving ceilings, lantern brackets grown rusted and barren. Every third step lay a shattered helm or blade, each relic reminding them this was not an innocent place. The bones of forgotten dwarves and stranger things lay where they'd fallen, some cradled by dust, others picked clean by smaller, crueler hands. The city, Borin whispered, had not fallen by glory, but by slow, doomed siege. Greed, isolation, and something ancient that slipped between the stones. They passed watchposts where no eyes now peered, and forges choked with petrified ash. Once, in a ruined market square, Tharald turned an overgrown cart to see a heap of half-eaten boots and gnawed bones. "Goblins," he grunted. "Or something with just as many teeth and less sense for shoes." Faelar knelt at each hall's threshold, reading the runes for warnings, his elven voice a faint wisp against overwhelming silence. He found recent marks too, clawed scratchings, scuffed prints, thin streaks of something that might have once been blood. "Not alone," he murmured, "and whatever's here is hungry." Brynden, axes always at hand, glanced restlessly behind them. "Let's keep moving." Borin's confidence began to fray with each junction. This should lead to the load halls, but I've not seen half the twists these maps promise. He paused at a split, and Faelar cast a worried look up the gigantic dwarven statues looming on either side. Even the air grew heavier. A wet breeze crawled up from lower levels, tinged with rot and a metallic tang that stung in the lungs. Torchlight showed patches of lichen and older, stickier stains that no rain could wash away. At times, the halls shuddered under the weight of their own memories. In one place, they found a barricade hastily constructed of old tables, shields, and bones. A last stand that had not endured. Down a spiral stair chiseled centuries ago, Tharald pressed an ear to the darkness. Far below, a trickle of water, a distant crash, perhaps stone, perhaps bone. Faelar moved to his side. "Daylight flees here," the elf said. "If the stories speak true, then at the lowermost vault we should find the king's last secret." They pressed through another passage, this one narrower, the scent of damp earth and something older thickening with every foot. Borin cheered under his breath. The unfamiliar slope of the floor meant they'd left the main path. "Old ways now," he promised. "None but the king's most trusted would come down these halls." The walls themselves began to change. At intervals, intricate patterns of stone inlay showed scenes of dwarven kings hoarding gold, forging rings, feasting in halls lost now to the deep. At a crossroads, Brynden tapped a skeletal hand protruding from a cracked wall. "Not so lucky," he muttered. They were not without brushes with danger. Once, their torchlight caught the gleam of 100 swollen eyes pressed into a chasm wall, creatures with scabbed hands and teeth filed to points, which slithered back into holes at the sight of steel and courage. Another time, a flight of pale bats burst overhead, shrieking so loud that all four nearly struck each other down in surprise. But the greatest peril was the ceaseless sense that something watched, waited, and kept gloom in its clenched jaws. It was Faelar who halted at the faintest trace of cool air across the right cheek, just beyond a collapsed archway. "There's something here," he whispered, and by the angled light they saw it. A cunning door, almost invisible, disguised as common stone. The pommel of Borin's blade pressed a carving of entwined keys, and a seam appeared. On the jamb was a line in curving cindering, nearly faded to unreadable. "What cannot be stolen nor broken by need, What lies at the end of all mortal greed? They all hesitated. Borin read it thrice, beard bristling in the unnatural chill. Tharald tried shouldering the door, but it would not budge. Brynden kicked a stone. Faelar studied the wording, eyes narrowing. "We must act, not speak," Faelar hazarded after a tense moment. Dwarves hide their wisdom in the hands as much as in words. "Greed ends here," Borin muttered, flexing his thick fingers. "Maybe it's to let go rather than to take." He pressed his palm against a stone shaped like a coin purse, while Faelar fingered an adjacent pressure plate, the one styled as an empty open hand. There was a heavy, grinding click. The floor beneath them trembled. The secret door slid sideways with agonizing slowness, shearing through centuries of dust and silence. A great clangor rang out, like a deep bell struck far below. In the distant tunnels, echoes awoke, and the hidden city seemed to rustle with breathlessness. Something, somewhere in the blackness, began to stir. The door stopped. Beyond, darkness yawned into a vault, obscured by stagnant air and the promise of secrets undisturbed for lifetimes. Cold sweat broke on every brow. Borin let out a shaky chuckle. "Now, lads, we see what old Durim was truly worth." But as they gathered at the threshold, a crawling dread grew even sharper. Behind them, the city seemed to exhale, and the quiet was no longer an empty thing, but the watchful hush of predators roused and listening. Chapter 3. The Vault of Greed. Dust whispered as the secret vault's door ground open, revealing, for the first time in ages, a chamber untouched by sunlight or memory. The party's torchlight played over treasures that no living hand had disturbed. Coins piled in artful mounds. Goblets resting where they'd been set down centuries ago. Necklaces draped across stone-fed cracks. The air was heavy, not with the rot of old looters, but with the cold, stale perfume of greed, sealed and undiminished. Borin was the first to step over the threshold, awe shimmering in his beard and bright eyes. "By Durin's beard," he breathed, "not a scratch nor a footprint. We are the first." Faelar traced a pattern of runes with trembling fingers. This place, such wards and workings. Even the ghosts outside did not dare whisper of this room. Brynden's axes swung at his sides, but even his bravado faded before the scale of gold and gems. So it was true. Old Durim really did lock himself away, left the rest to rot when the doom fell. On a raised dais at the far end of the vault sat the remains of the last king. He slumped on his throne, crowned and clad in armor so old the mail link seemed to bleed into bone. Bony hands clutched something tight. A glinting ring, chased with runes. "For the taking," Tharald muttered, eyes fixed on the king's hands. Hard won, but well earned. Borin, still overcome, barely managed a warning. Careful, dwarven kings guard their gains to the end. As Brynden and Borin each swept up coins and jewelry, swapping low, gleeful curses, Faelar worked to fill his own pouch with trinkets and curious tokens. The scraping of metal, then a hiss. Shadows lurched in the far corner. The torchlight caught a cluster of green eyes and grey skin. Goblins. A scouting band, perhaps drawn by echoes of the vault's opening. Now frozen at the sight of living intruders and their precious gold. For one beat, no one spoke. Then chaos erupted. The goblins squealed, slinging stones and brandishing jagged blades. Borin loosed a quarrel, skewering the first. Brynden pivoted, axes flashing. Tharald charged, his shield absorbing the brunt of a spear, his sword carving a path. Faelar's blade sang coldly in the gloom. The scuffle was brief but furious. Goblins fell in squealing heaps, and the party pressed advantage. One shattered blade sliced Brynden's leather, but only grazed skin. In less than a minute, 5 goblins lay dead or dying. The last fled, screeching into the dark. Panting, the adventurers drew together. "We must go," Faelar hissed, already listening to echoes from the deeper city. More monsters, many more, were on the move. Borin frantically swept handfuls of gems into his belt. Faelar snatched up a mithril brooch. Brynden, a necklace crusted with pearls. Tharald, heart-pounding, went to the king's throne and pried the ring free from the locked grip of old, bony fingers. For a heartbeat, cold shot through him, but the moment passed. He slipped the ring onto his finger, thinking only of its weight and luster. The sound of many feet, the gurgle of orcish voices, goblin howls, and worse, rose from the corridors beyond. "Out!" Tharald barked. They ran, loot heavy in arms and packs, Faelar guiding by memory, Borin clutching his crossbow. But escape was not so simple. Halfway through the snaking halls, their route to the main stairs erupted in a thunder of feet. A horde of orcs and goblins surged around the bend, blocking their path with snapping blades and frothing rage. "Other way!" Brynden shouted. They spun and dashed into an old feasting hall, now ruined and dust-choked, darting between toppled tables. Tharald led, shield battering the way clear, until he rounded a narrow corner and nearly collided with a looming orc, clad in ragged armor, bearing a knife as long as a human arm. With a roar, Tharald met the orc head-on. Sword to blade, shield to face, they crashed, grappling in the twisting dark. The orc stabbed, catching Tharald low in the side. Tharald's shield smashed the orc to stone. Dead. Brynden and Faelar dragged Tharald back, Borin covering with quarrels. "I'm fine," Tharald lied, red blooming beneath his tunic. "Keep moving." The sounds behind them thickened, closing in on every side, howls and cruel laughter, pattering feet like rainfall on stone. Borin saw their only hope. A narrow old corridor, braced by ancient doors, barely wide enough for one to stand. "Here!" They tumbled in, Tharald last. With blood streaking his armor, he forced his battered shield into a crack in the corridor, barring the way as best he could. "Go!" he gasped. "I'll hold this. You get out. That's an order." Borin hesitated. "We can..." "Go!" Tharald shouted, swinging the sword, fending off the first snapping jaws. "Don't waste what I'm buying you." Reluctant, Brynden and Faelar pulled Borin away, diving deeper into the maze. Tharald blocked every strike, pain fading. The goblins crashed into his shield, arrows pinged off the rim, teeth snapped at his boots. He answered each blow with a bellow, swords swinging in great, desperate arcs. A cold clarity, an unnatural lightness grew in his veins. He bellowed his defiance, blades sweeping wide, voice echoing through ancient stone. For a moment, the monsters pressed him. Then something shifted. His pain faded to nothing. He felt taller, stronger. His voice rang with unnatural power. When he shouted, "Face me, cowards! Face death and be judged!" The monsters stared at him, not with fear, but blank, strange disinterest. Their frenzy faded into doubt, then into a strange collective indifference. One by one, with snarls and guttural curses, they turned away. His shield was slick with blood, not his own, but his body knew no wound or fear. And then he tried to step forward, his legs heavy, his vision fogged. The light from his torch dimmed, grew pale, and the tunnel twisted under his feet, unfamiliar and fragmented. Chapter 4. Shadowbound. Silence fell. A silence so deep Tharald's pulse hammered against it and was swallowed whole. The monsters, who moments before had howled for his blood, now slipped away like smoke. Their eyes, wild with animal hunger, passed over him without interest. He stood, sword raised, throat raw from his last defiant shout, yet suddenly alone. He drew a shuddering breath, expecting the burning in his wounded side to flare anew, but felt nothing. His armor, battered and streaked with blood, fit oddly on his frame. His arm, which had trembled with exhaustion, now bore the shield as if it weighed no more than a feather. He listened. No wind, no claws, no distant screams. Only the steady drip of ancient water and the echo of his panting breath, except even that soon faded, replaced by a hush like damp velvet. Tharald leaned against the stone, suddenly unsure which way his companions had fled. His memory, sharp just moments ago, swam in sluggish circles. He called out, "Borin! Brynden! Faelar!" But his voice was muffled as if he spoke underwater. No reply came. Light spilled from his torch, strangely pale, colours leaching away until all around him was wan grey and white. He tried to force his legs to move. They answered, but only slowly, as if some ancient gravity pressed him back. Step by step, he wandered the corridors of Nargum-Baraz, hoping each turn might bring a forgotten stare, or the glimmer of escape, or the sound of friends hurrying back for him. Instead, every hall he entered grew less familiar. The carvings that once spoke of dwarven glory now coiled and ran like lines of black water. Half-shapes watched from shadowy doorways, never distinct, always just a hint at the edge of sight. His torch flickered, but would not gutter out, even as the flame shrank to a wisp and the heat left his hand. He turned a corner and found a banquet hall filled with empty tables. Another, a vault piled with pale gold that dissolved at his touch. A third, a long stone bridge, unbroken and arching into nothingness, over a chasm that echoed only his own footsteps. Time twisted, a moment, or a century, or an instant. He couldn't tell. Fear began to creep in, sharp around the edge of confusion. Why did nothing feel real? Why did nothing bite, or ache, or bleed? Why did the city itself seem to reshape behind his every step, denying every avenue of escape? The world thickened, lost detail and warmth. He was cold, impossibly cold, but could not shiver. Desperate, he turned back, retracing his steps as best he could. The vault, the flight, the last passage. Each way seemed longer, the walls more warped. The ache in his chest wasn't pain anymore, but a hollow longing for the world above, for the heat of battle, even for the taste of iron on his tongue. At last, the corridor narrowed, and the pale torchlight swelled to reveal a familiar scene. His battered shield, wedged tightly against broken stone, and just below it, a shape sprawled with awkward finality. His own body. Armor split, hand still gripping his sword, head bowed as if listening to the secrets of rock and dust. For a long time, Tharald stared, uncertain whether to feel rage or sorrow or shame. The ring, the dead king's ring, gleamed on the corpse's finger. Its cold fire never dimmed. He reached for the shield, but his fingers slipped through leather and bronze. He tried to touch his own face, to shake himself awake, but there was no substance, no warmth, no heartbeat. Now alone, he turned and beheld the city as it truly was, a labyrinth of empty stone, choked with mist and shadows, bound to greed and death. No path led up, no voice called him onward. Behind him, the shadow of the dwarven king's throne beckoned, and somewhere far off, another band of looters would someday come, drawn by the same tales and doomed by the same hunger. Tharald knew at last what the city demanded. He was the wraith now, the ghost on the threshold, forever guarding the ruin made by greed. His name would fade, his friends would flee, but the ring bound his soul to Nargum-Baraz, a flicker in the endless dark. And so he remained, a watcher in twilight stone, a warning and a secret, forever part of the shadows that wait beneath the mountain. The story has come to an end. Our hearth still burns. Stay, warm yourself, and let sleep take you as the world drifts into silence.